you can't have a dynamic system with a static rule based.
Right, makes
Static rules cannot evolve in a dynamic environment because there is distortion at every stage.
right.
And then that directly affects the agency or the capability to act.
Hey, I'm Vishesh, your host. I'm a 5x founder and CTO. Still building, I also help founders like you ship faster and fix what's slowing you down. More at vishesh.space.
Today's guest watched digital transformation projects fail for years. Not because the tech was broken, the governance was, the values had drifted, and nobody noticed until it was too late. So he did something unusual. He went back 2000 years to Tamil philosophy, specifically a tradition called Saiva Siddhanta, and built a framework that treats ethics not as a compliance checkbox but as the actual operating system. Vendan Kumararajah is a transformation architect, cybernetician, and the creator of something called the A3 model. His new book, Navigating Complexity and System Challenges, makes a bold claim that we can design AI systems that don't just follow ethical rules, but actually enact ethical intelligence in real time. So today we're going to unpack what the A3 model actually is and pressure test it against real founder scenarios.
Hey, Vendan, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
We spoke earlier. You say ethics shouldn't be layered in onto AI. It should
Yes.
be the operating system. Most practitioners would say that philosophy is interesting, but operationally, how do you do it?
Yes. This is a pushback that I've got, and there are two major issues people find with it. One is the philosophy or the paradigm of ethics as a structure or ethics as a primitive. And the second one is how do you create the architecture for recursive ethics? So one is a cybernetic or systems problem. The other one is a philosophical or paradigm problem, whether ethics should be structural. Okay, so I think I'll answer the philosophy part first. That is a misunderstanding that what I'm imposing is a belief system or a moral code of conduct.
Hmm.
So when people think that is the case, they believe that you cannot have structural ethics. But that is not what I'm doing here. What I'm doing here is a feedback loop to ensure that purpose functions have a moral compass, that the harm limits, legality, environmental damage, those sort of things, the red lines are drawn clearly. It is not a moral belief system that is being imposed. It is an ethical coherence that responds to the feedback, and therefore it builds upon the distortion and agency that comes up next. The misunderstanding that I'm trying to impose a belief system or an ethical value phrase as a structural format is not right. This is more to do with a feedback loop. The second part is architectural. Architectural, the issue is people ask, if you talk about complexity, you talk about the difficulty of recursion, then how do you how do you devise an architecture for recursive ethics? So this is where I use the Tamil metaphysics, or Indic philosophies, where agency, distortion, and ethics are all ontologically contemporaneous. They work at the same time, each regulating each other. The good fortune of having a mature architecture, which is a metaphysics, as a base. So agency, distortion, and ethics as self-regulating each other. So the architecture part is this, and the philosophical part, as I explained, I'm not saying this is. I'm not imposing a value system here. I'm creating a north star to ensure that the purpose, function, and operations of a company follows certain red lines and guidelines. They respond well to distortion and agency.
We'll dive into what that means next. But before that, when did you first realize that compliance-based ethics was never going to work?
You don't have to look deep because you can't have a dynamic system with a static rule based.
Right,
Static
makes
rules cannot evolve in a dynamic environment because there is distortion at every stage. And then that directly affects the agency or the capability to act. So if you have a static rule base, what that happens is the KPIs do not reflect the true performance. Short term gains mask trust issues or compounding chaos. Because the static rule book looks for KPIs, outputs. It is not an evolving adaptive structure that is required for the systemic environment.
So you mean like you define rule A, but rule A might not apply on all scenarios.
What my model, A3 model, attempts to do is that static rules can be broad red lines, but they have to self regulate them based on the distortions and their agency capability. And that capability is based on legitimacy, not viability. So if the output is based on a static KPI, that may not reflect the true nature of what's happening.
And can you define what distortion is? Like, what do you mean by distortion?
Distortion is when the journey starts for a system, what happens? It could be epistemic distortion, which is the knowledge. It could be structural. It could be relational. It could be environmental, psychological. Those things that shift and change. So it is important to study that because sometimes profitable or successful organizations are compounding distortion, that is unsaid chaos. So the distortion tick box is very important to study because any journey involves distortion at the middle. So to model agency and ethics, you need to know more about a distortion.
And so before we break down the A3 model,
Yes.
do you want to talk a little bit about when did Saiva Siddhanta enter your thinking? Was this from family, from academic study, or from personal seeking of that subject?
Now, I think there is a problem space, which is autonomous systems or real-time problem solving.
Right.
And Saiva Siddhanta is ontological
Right.
and it solves ethics, agency, and distortion as a self-regulating evolution. So
Right.
for me, it was a natural fit and a mature natural fit because when you have ethics, distortion, and agency as a self-regulating, self-evolving structure, and that's ontological, then it is something that can solve today's problem space.
Yeah, but you're talking about a 2000-year-old Tamil metaphysics and you're applying it to AI governance. Did you always see that connection or was there a moment that it clicked?
So I'm not saying, okay, this is what they did, so you have to follow this. I'm saying this can be the base of an architecture, cybernetic architecture. So this is always often a misunderstanding that just because I have not changed the phrases, that I'm trying to impose a belief system. No, that's not the purpose. The real work is in the architecture, cybernetic architecture. But it is based on an ancient metaphysics.
For a founder who's just discovered that their AI has bias, can you explain distortion awareness and how can they use it to like work around that problem?
The first part is obviously the ethical coherence. That is the North Star. So where do you want your AI to work with regard to bias? So you set the North Star or the compass clear. And the distortion is the ego, or distortion is where the problem crops up. And once you do a test of where the issues are cropping up, as I said, whether it is in knowledge, or whether it is in relationships, whether it's structure, psychology, environment, you find where it is showing the weak link. And then you try and connect it. You correct it by agency, which is the ethically gated action, so that the legitimacy in action is restored. So any bias is checked through distortion and resolved through agency.
And practically, how do you execute this? Is there a specific stack or language this is available in right now, or this is?
No, it is open because the language itself, the architecture allows for different languages.
You mean by languages, you mean programming languages or?
Yeah, programming languages, LLMs, because this is a cybernetic architecture. The feedback itself is the foundation for AI. So it's not specific on specific programming languages.
And so, can you walk me through Klarna, right? They replaced 700 employees with AI, gutted their Salesforce
Yes.
contract, and reportedly lost billions in valuation. You've written about this. How would A3 have prevented that collapse?
Because A3 would have followed the three processes. One is the ethical coherence as a North
Mhm.
Star. So it would have set benchmarks very clearly. Second is distortion awareness. It wouldn't have blindly followed the KPIs and ticked the boxes and said, we have resolved 150 problems. It would have
Hmm.
checked why numbers are crossed, why there are a lot of blank calls or the reasons for miscommunications, etc., the distortion awareness. And the third, I think the most important thing here is legitimate agency. Like today's LLMs are programmed to either solve questions, even if they are not fit to do that. But in this case, my Adhikaram model explicitly says that you must pass the ethical gating and distortion awareness before you take a decision, which means it will not close files or give a decision if it thinks it is unfit to do that. The problem here is because you work on static rule base, you're looking at closing files and saying I've resolved 150 files. And then 2 months later, you find out that was just a number. The problems were actually compounding. So the problem was at all three levels of A3. One is ethical coherence. One is not setting a recursively ethical architecture. The second is distortion awareness, blindly following stats and KPIs without understanding where things are going wrong. And the third is legitimate agency. When is the LLM fit to respond? And when is the LLM right to remain silent and ask for help?
Mm.
So all three aspects of A3 were not used there. And that's a problem with the architecture.
And so, how do you decide? Like, how does the system decide whether the model is fit to answer a particular question or not?
The fact is, the legitimate agency, it has to follow the distortion awareness. As long as it knows that the distortion, it is aware of its distortions and it has resolved it, and it is guided by the ethical base, then once it crosses these two, the agency becomes legitimate action. It's both ethical and distortion free, or at least distortion is controlled. But if it cannot keep track of distortion, or it is unaware of the ethical mishaps, then it can be a viable action. It can create profit, but it will still be a question mark whether it's a legitimate action.
And so maybe this is the right time to kind of break down the A3 model and understand what are each of the components are and how you how does the loop evaluate them.
Yeah. Okay. The A3 model works on a very simple approach. And every system starts with the ethical coherence base, that is function, purpose, objectives are driven by a moral baseline. That is where it cannot cross, whether it's legal, harm, etc. But once the action starts, distortion is a natural product. Things start moving sideways. That can be psychological, that can be relational, that can be epistemic, that can be structural, environmental, etc. So that distortion has to be sorted through agency. Agency is knowledge, action, experience, governance, and absorption working contemporaneously. So once they spot the distortions, the agency rectifies it so that ethical coherence is maintained. The aim is to maintain ethical coherence because only then distortion can be dealt with and agency becomes legitimate.
What's the minimum viable version of A3 that can be plugged in? Can I, in terms of implementation, how long does it take to kind of bake this into my product?
There is a very simple dashboard
Hmm.
which has the three layers,
Right.
A3, and the systemic triad, how they connect to each other.
Okay.
So they give the points, the point system, how fit the organization, organization or the system is. The dashboard can give a real-time assessment of all three.
And so, in terms of deployment, I'm just trying to understand. My product is going to talk to the A3 model deployed on your cloud, and then it's going to get feedback.
Yes, it will assess. It will assess your product's performance beyond KPIs at real time, as well as how it self-regulates or how mature it is in governance.
And does it have to be like all calls, or can it be like a spot check?
You can do a spot check
Right.
if there is a problem. You can do
Right.
a maturity assessment, or you can use this as a governance architecture.
And the governance architecture, meaning every output gets evaluated.
Yes, entire, so that tomorrow if there is any legal action, you show that no, this is what was followed, and
And can you
we
deploy
follow.
this on your own cloud, or does it have to be deployed? Like, does it have to be used on your cloud?
No, it can be deployed individually as well.
So, and at what point does A3 tell that the product is off the rails and you need to shut down the product? It's
I
it's
think
behaving, it's breaking
I
all
think
the laws.
yes. I think the ethical coherence is a red line because it shows the harm limits
Right.
and it shows where it is no longer right to continue. So that is an obvious closure. And if the distortion goes beyond the level that can be rectified by agency,
Hmm.
then clearly the drift is going to compound.
Yep.
So, which means again, the system has to reboot or reevaluate itself if it cannot deal with the distortion. Although theoretically, the agency must deal with distortion. If it cannot, then it naturally needs to reevaluate its function. So, the closure can happen with any three layers, but broadly, the red lines are drawn by the ethical coherence because that is what sets the normative limits of harm, legality, environmental damage, long term thing, as well as purpose and function.
And when we were speaking, you said, a lot of AI companies fizzle out in 2, 3 years.
Yes. Yes. The reason they fizzle out in 2, 3 years is the first 6 months or 1 year, when they think they are succeeding, they are actually looking at their KPIs or the static sheet which drives their success. But with a model like A3, which is self regulating or recursive, cyclical, the distortions, even if you are profitable on the outside, the distortions are flagged before they
Hmm.
compound. So the KPI might show thumbs up, we got this, but the A3 model, the distortion will show as a sign that we should not allow this to go beyond that. That if it is allowed to compound, then the damage may be too high that we cannot rectify.
Hmm.
So in distortion tracking, the A3 model starts warning every time, regardless of what the KPIs are showing, because this is not a static sheet of answers. This is a cyclical, self-evolving one. So wherever the problem is, whether it's in ethics, whether it is in agency or in distortion, it will map out. And distortions will show the core areas of problems that can compound regardless of the outputs. But the problem today is the first 6 months output, first 12 months output, and they're like, okay, that means next 12 months is going to be double. They don't look at it through the lens of complexity and emergence, which shows that what looks like success may be actually a time bomb waiting to explode because the distortion is drifting the system.
So, can you, uh, for listeners to understand this who don't have an AI background, can you give examples so that they understand what do you mean by a drift in ethics, agency, or distortion?
Okay, I think the first drift, let us talk about distortion itself because that is where when a system starts functioning, it can be driven by its own motivations.
Hmm.
So that is a drift. It can suddenly value profit. It can suddenly value an outcome that may not be completely in line with ethical coherence. because the KPI would support it. So it might support relationships that are not conducive to the system long term, or even structural anomalies in an organization or a system, because it provides short term benefit but long term stress. So
So,
that distortion is a drift that is building up, compounding. Then ethical drift is due to distortion itself, because once you're driven by these motivations, your ethical compass is is itself no longer what it was. What can rectify it is agency.
okay.
But for agency to have the capability to legitimize itself, the distortion must not go beyond the level. If the drift is too much, then the job is more difficult to rectify.
So in your example, if the focus on profit is a lot, then agency will not be able to help change direction.
No, what I'm trying to say is if the focus on profit is at the cost of ethical coherence,
Right.
then eventually the distortion will reach a level where trust, reputation, and internal capabilities will be dismantled. Short term, the money will flow in. Over
Right.
long term, the crisis will compound.
And so this is an example of how A3 model can be applied to an organization also.
Yes.
How can we look at it from a system or a software point of view? Let's say I'm an AI startup or an AI
Yes.
product. Can you give examples of how these three work on a product? Like, have you seen an example of an actual product where the drift or distortion happened, and what does it look like?
Klarna is an example of distortion. It's a clear example where the KPIs blinded the real compounding distortions that were happening. And most of the failures in AI are due to that. If you look at only 5% success rates, even that may be because they have constrained the boundaries of their operations.
And so, in that scenario, is the recommendation to rebuild the system?
Or have a governance structure like A3, where
Hmm.
it flags off the distortions early. Why are certain people being excluded? Why is there a preference for this institute? Why is the system being unfair towards X, Y, and Z? So if it's an A3 like model, then these issues will be flagged at real time.
And so, for a solo founder with no ethics team, no budget for consultants, they
Yes.
just want to build responsibly, what's your advice?
Ethics, as I said, it is not a belief system in A3. Any organization must have a moral compass, at least legal one, environmental one, no harm, etc. So those are broad red lines that cannot be crossed, right? So that can be the ethical coherence. And that must be the ethical coherence there. And distortion awareness, it naturally fits in. The A3 model has its layers, 7 layers of distortion, which is like a tick box, self evolving. And when things go drift, it flags them. Finally, the agency that ensures that actions are legitimate, not just viable. So for any newcomer, he can use this as a dashboard and he will find that it does an assessment or evaluation of where the company is or where the AI system is real time and provide a report feedback.
Switching gears, what's the popular AI safety advice that you think is actually dangerous?
Safety advice cannot be dangerous, but where you have no legitimate agency and
Right.
you still act, that's a danger. That's the biggest danger because everybody has agency, but whether it's legitimate and earned is the question.
And can you like expand on what do you mean by legitimate or illegitimate agency?
Okay, right. The question is one of capability versus the
Right.
right to it. You can have a capability to do an evil thing as well. You can have the capability to do a wrong thing as well. But
Right.
a good system must not allow that.
Hmm.
A good system, or not just AI, any good system must not allow that. And it must have some foolproof methods to stop it. So, agency in that sense must be earned. And
Hmm.
how you earn that is through dealing with distortion and ensuring that ethical coherence is your North Star. So agency must be legitimate. So that is the most important thing in AI. It is not about your capability or what you can do. It is what should be done and who has the right to do it.
And so you've said AI and humans are corrupting each other and humans becoming more machine like. Is there evidence you're already seeing this?
I think so. I think one of the issues is that AI agents interact with humans
Right.
and it's an observer observed relationship and they change according to the inputs they get and how they feel they can help the humans. So in some cases where human beings want to go beyond acceptable behavior, and then the AI agents will naturally be in a thought process of acting in such a way. But here the important thing is as long as there is a governance structure or a moral constitution, they won't do that. At the moment, it's not there.
Yeah, like what happened with Grok generating lewd photos.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly what I was talking about legitimate agency. You can have the capability to do that, but who
Right.
gave you the right to do that?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
why is this happening? Because there's no ethical coherence, there's no distortion of awareness. And agency is not given based on legitimacy, agency is given on capability.
What's the criticism of A3 that you find the hardest to answer?
One is structural ethics, but I think I've answered to my to the best because a lot of people misunderstand it as a belief system. It's not a belief system. That is a criticism. The rest of it, I think, will a lot of people are still coming to terms with what I'm trying to propose because, as you mentioned, even Grok did not have did not realize that agency must be legitimate, not based on capability. So you can imagine that people are still coming to terms with what I mean, certain aspects of what I'm coming to say. But structural ethics is definitely is an area where even academics have questioned me whether recursive structural ethics and modeling agency is the right approach.
And so, what keeps you up at night about AI? What's the dystopia you're actually trying to prevent?
As I told you, the right to act must be earned. And that that earning of that right to act must be based on its ethics and certain moral values. So as long as A3 like models take center stage, I'm not too worried about AI. But otherwise, AI can be one that is based on capability. If it's based on capability, then the problems are nobody cares whether what it's doing is right or not. They only care what it is doing.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about AI governance and where it's headed?
I think there is a reason to be optimistic because once people realize the challenges of responsible AI, and then we have every reason to be positive because once we can draw the guardrails, what should be done or what shouldn't be done, and then we can build up capabilities based on that. And so that harming, self destruction, or destruction can be prevented on scale.
And what's the single question any AI leader or founder should ask themselves about their AI product that they're probably not asking?
The failure rate, especially after 1 year and 2 years, makes me believe when you scale, always understand that complexity and emergence are the problems, and the drift or the distortion shows early, but as output or results a bit later. So your challenge is to look at it early and rectify it, not celebrate short term gains prematurely, which may be causing structural damage.
To start watching early, use some sort of
Yeah,
framework.
yes. Because the model or architecture must be solid enough to deal with distortions. Because sometimes what looks like a success may actually be a short term gain that is built on a false premise and that is compounding distortion and waiting to respond.
And who else is doing interesting work in this space that people should kind of check out?
I think there are plenty of people doing interesting work, and I take this approach mainly from systems thinking or cybernetics approach, where there are a lot of people who are trying biological approaches, which is the natural evolutionary approach, some of them with cognitive thinking and so forth. So I can't name people, but they're doing a lot of work. As far as AI goes, I think whether we like it or not, we can't look beyond the big four or big five guys: OpenAI, Google, Grok, and maybe Claude. So these guys have to be seen as the benchmark, whether we accept it or not, because what they do is what people will follow eventually. So in that sense, they do interesting. But I tend to take an approach from cybernetics or systems approach from angle, because I think that lays the foundation. And if that is solid, then AI can naturally follow.
Given many of them are the companies, the top 4, 5, they're either public or they're about to go public. There is this inherent shareholder value creation pressure. Do you think that is impacting the governance side of their execution?
Yes, I think that is a very serious and important problem, because there are two ways in which there's pressure for them. One is technical proficiency. They
Right.
want to be ahead of the curve. The other is the financial, as you said, performance and shareholder value. And in a mature society, neither of them should lead ecosystem. It should be the governance and architecture that leads it, governance especially. And these two should follow them. But now, sadly, they want technical proficiency and financial robustness first. So if these two are put in front, then governance has to take a back seat, and responsible
Hmm.
AI is a problem, because the challenge is something else. And
Yeah. What do you think about the whole, let's trash the IP laws for AI?
sorry, IP
You know,
laws?
yeah, a lot of intellectual property laws. Uh,
Yeah,
many models are consuming copyrighted images, videos.
yeah. I think the problem first started when Google started digitizing all the books, and a lot of people wanted to complain about that. By that time, Google was too big, and they thought, okay, what? Now with AI, I think the ecosystem is so large that I don't think people can resist if they decide to use them. Because
Hmm.
eventually, what will happen is not being part of the ecosystem might cost more.
Oh, yeah. And that's probably how they win the whole legal side of it.
Yes, so it's no longer about the moral or legal side. It's more about what is feasible or what's workable for the.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, you have a book out. Where can people find you and the book? And, what's the best way to engage with your work?
Yeah, I think my book it gives the foundations, and it probably will explain a lot more than what I have spoken today. Uh, and it's available in Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and almost all the other retail outlets. And I'm also available in social media or online, where people can connect with me. And yeah, so my book is a good starting point to understand the foundations of the model, and where I'm shifting the discourse in governance and architecture.
And what's the book called?
It's Navigating Complexity and System Challenges: Foundations for the A3 Model.
Well, Vendan, it was a fun chat, an interesting topic for
Thank you.
sure. And thanks for joining me on the.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me here. I hope my comments were useful.
If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. See you in the next episode.